So I came across Zap recently, which is a Zig's framework, and they had pretty bold claims for its performance. According to them, it can outperform both Axum and Go, which is pretty impressive. So let's see if that's true when we've built a real-world API with it. But from the title of this video, you probably already know that this video is not about Zig. In this video, we will be comparing performance of Axum from Rust and standard library of Go. Now my initial plan was to compare Zig, Rust and Go, but Zig just refused to work with Postgres. So I switched the database to SQLite. But then I ran into performance issues with CORM and basically I've the package that was capable of using SQLite database, as either it didn't work properly or it just didn't utilize the CPU properly. So finally, I decided to split the videos in two parts, one in which we compare Rust and Go with Postgres database and the other one in which we can compare Zig and Go with SQLite. Now this is my first time building anything in Go and my methods may not be perfect, so take this result with a grain of salt. So just like my previous videos, I will be using Autocannon and Postman to test these APIs. These APIs will be running on a VM with following specification, and both of these APIs have these 5 endpoints. So basically we're carrying out every single operation like fetch, insert, delete, create and update, and we even have a middleware in between for date and delete route. With all of that out of the way, let's start with Autocannon. Okay, so in Autocannon, I'll use the base endpoint, and this endpoint fetches all the users' information from the users table, and there are about 10,000 users in the table. We will run Autocannon 3 times with different configuration. For the first test, we have 50 connections and 2 pipeline. And in second test, we will increase the number of connections to 150 and remove the pipeline factor. Now during these first 2 tests, one thing was clear, that Go was using a lot more memory. If you compare both Axum and Go API side by side, as soon as the test begins, you can see memory usage increases significantly in Go compared to Axum. Now overall the memory usage is not that bad, but still it is higher than Rust. And finally we have our heavier Autocannon test with 100 connection, 3 pipeline factor and 10,000 requests. Axum completed the first test within 17 seconds, next one in 19, and the final one in 83 seconds. Go took 18 seconds in both first and second test, and in the final one it took about 84 seconds. Now if we compare these performance side by side, Axum has a 1 second lead in first test, Go has a second lead in second test, and again Axum has a 1 second lead in third test, which means that the performance was pretty much identical, as all this is within the margin of error. The amount of data rate in all 3 tests was also identical, the only difference was the memory usage I talked about earlier. Now if the read speed in both of them is identical, let's do a more comprehensive test with Postman and see if there's any difference. Now in this test, I am expecting about 10 to 20% of error rate, as I have 10,000 users and the put request for update will use 5,000 initial users and the delete request will use the next 5,000 users. So after a point, the delete request will probably show a lot of errors. And as for the get request, which fetches a single user, it should have half the errors than delete, as it will fetch the information from a random user between 1 and 10,000. This test will be more accurate because it will include all the endpoints of our API, so it will carry out every single operation. Now in this test, I am setting a ramp upload profile with 25 virtual user and 5 minutes of duration. So even in this test, both the APIs perform very similarly. Both of them had almost exact same error rate, requests per second, and total requests. But by the end of the test, the average response time was slightly higher for Go than Rust. And if we compare the results of every single endpoint, we can see that the error rate is identical. Both min and max response time is better in Go, but the average response time is better in Rust. Now if we compare both the runs, we can see at the beginning the performance was identical, but Axum gained slight lead at this point, which it maintained for a time, and then it gained a slightly bigger lead. Now overall the performance was really good for both of them, but in this test Axum clearly performed slightly better. Let's also take a look at the results I got when using SQLite database. So Autocannon with the config of 50 connections, 3 pipeline factor and 20,000 requests took about 294 seconds in Axum, but it only took about 94 seconds in Go. And if we compare the Postman performance, Axum was slightly worse in the beginning, but as the test went on, it just kept getting worse. And at the end the performance difference was of about 63 milliseconds. The performance depends on various factors including the database. If you're using Postgres, then Axum will give you slightly better performance. But overall, both Axum and Go will give you comparable performance as long as you're not using SQLite. I hope this video was useful. Please give a thumbs up if you enjoyed this video, consider subscribing, and I will see you in the next one.